Paper Bag, Chapter 7.
Paris was dry and cold when we stepped off the plane. Eddie and Frank were by my side again. We were met by a group of large, tough-looking men.
They are members of the European clan. Let me do all the talking.
Frank spoke inside my head. His lips moved ever so slightly. I had no way of knowing if the others heard. It seemed only directed to me. The conversation with the French dragons was all in English instead of French, but I still had no idea what was said. My mind was so focused on seeing my mother again. A large BMW van pulled up to the group. Out of the driver's side came my Aunt Cass. All of the dragons did not look at my aunt with the exception of Eddie and Frank. She put her arms around me and whispered in my ear.
"We know where your mother is. These drakes are going to help."
I followed her back to the BMW. Frank sat shotgun. I got stuck in the back, sandwiched between Eddie and Skunk. After 15 minutes with the two of them, I was ready to get out. The van came to a stop at a house. We all got out and went inside. It was a normal home out in the country. The furniture was worn, but it was clean. All the pictures were paintings. Chairs were pulled from the dining area and sat in a circle for anyone to sit in. Frank sat at the table and pulled 3 laptops from a briefcase. On the screens I saw several viewpoints. He was doing surveillance or something. Cass waved to me.
"Come sit by me."
Everyone held a phone in their hand, watching something. When I sat next to Cass, I looked at her phone. I could see someone moving down a long hallway. It was dark. I looked at another phone. They were watching the same thing. "What's going on, Cass?"
"We are very close to where your mother is being kept. Our Seraphim team is checking to see if your mother really is in the facility."
I'm sitting by Frank. I stood and went back to the kitchen. Frank's computer screens were larger, and I could see more detail. He was watching what everyone else was and several other video feeds as well. What are the other video feeds for?
I'm watching for movement.
What do you mean?
I'll show you later. My focus needs to be on this.
He never took his eyes off the screens. I got the impression that I was distracting him. So I just folded my arms and watched the main screen. We watched a woman stand in front of a wall. She immediately became the color of the wall, and I could see the lines in the brick. It was hard to tell where the wall ended, and she began. "Cool," I breathed. The woman moved from her position and looked down another hall. 2 nurses were talking at a desk. I counted 4 glass windows. She moved slowly down the hallway, blending into her surroundings as she went. The first 2 rooms were empty. When I saw the next room, there was a woman with dark hair lying in a bed. Her skin was pure white. She turned towards the camera as if she sensed the woman. I stood and gasped for air. That woman was my mother. Tears filled my eyes. The camera turned to another room. There was a man in it. I couldn't make out if it was my father or not, but I wanted it to be him. The video went back to my mother. She held out a hand to the woman and shook her head no. "What does that mean?" I asked Frank.
She doesn't want her to come in the room, that's all.
A nurse stepped in front of the camera. She was so close that it was mostly white.
Move.
Skunk yelled. I had to agree. "My mom is alive," I whispered and sat in my chair again. Before anyone could see that my eyes were filled with tears, I rubbed them away with my hand. What I wanted to do was burst out crying like I did as a child. I was so happy. But men don't cry, so I held it back. I would let it out when I was alone. "Can I go?"
"You are going to stay here with Frank,"
Aunt Cass said and put her arms around me.
"We will bring your mother to you."
You will be able to watch everything.
Frank added. "How close are we?"
5 miles.
Eddie tightened a harness across his chest. Skunk came up behind him. She patted Eddie on the shoulder, though she kept her eyes away from Aunt Cass.
The Drakes have it easy. Us Seraphim get to do all the heavy lifting.
"You're going to carry him?" Eddie was easily 50 pounds heavier than Skunk.
Eddie, no way. I am carrying Zeke. Helen is carrying Eddie.
Yeah, we drew straws and I got the short stick.
Helen said playfully.
I also have the longest wingspan.
She started to expand her wings to emphasize her point. I gulped hard. How long will it take to get there flying?
10 to 15 minutes if we find some good thermals to help lift.
I followed them outside to see them fly. Helen transformed into a huge black dragon with long, thick wings. The scales on her body glistened like gems. Eddie hooked his harness to hers with 2 large hooks, then pulled to make sure they were secure. I stepped back towards the door of the house as Helen flapped her wings, and with a leap, she pulled Eddie into the air. Then Skunk and the others followed. It was a magnificent sight, and I wished I had not destroyed my phone, so I could take a picture of them. None of my friends would ever believe what I was seeing. In the pit of my stomach, I knew that I would probably never see my friends again. It was a bittersweet because on the one hand I would have my mother back, but my old life was gone forever. As I watched them fly away, these thoughts filled my mind, before my Aunt Cass brought me back to reality.
Are you going to stand out in the cold all night?
Can we see what they see?
Yes, but it isn't much, mostly lights.
I was afraid to hope that I would wake from this dream and that my mother and father were dead. At any moment I would hear Bob call my name and tell me to wake up. As much as I missed Bob and my old life, I would give it all up to be with either of my parents again. I walked into the house and sat next to Cass as they studied the video feed. Frank was pounding away on the keyboard, pulling up more and more video feeds from security cameras from the street, houses, and banks until he had a view of the building from several viewpoints. To calm my nerves, I got up and paced the floor behind Cass and Frank. It seemed to take a very long time before one of the feeds showed them approaching a large building that looked like a hospital.
There they are.
Cass sounded relieved.
Packages are away.
I heard Helen say and watched as she dropped Eddie gently on the roof. He quickly had his harness off. Helen was faster and headed to the service door. Even though she was not a dragon anymore, she was still totally black. It was hard to see her. Movement was the only way I was able to track her. Frank switched the video feed to Helen's camera. She picked the lock, but Eddie pushed her aside and had it open with a key card. We could hear her breathing as they raced down the stairs. What I could not hear was even more amazing. They were completely silent, which I could not imagine Eddie ever being. He always thundered everywhere he went.
We need to go.
Frank started closing laptops. He kept Helen's feed open. Aunt Cass grabbed the computer we were watching and followed Frank out to the van. When I opened the passenger door and went to get in, my seat was the only seat in the back. On the floor next to me was a tote filled with medical stuff. What is all this? I asked, holding up a bag full of liquid.
We are going to pick up your mother, and we don't know what she will need medically.
Cass explained. We took off at a speed that my father would say was reckless. Frank drives like a maniac. I was holding on to my seat for dear life. My life flashed before my eyes at least 3 times before we reached our destination. We pulled up to a gate that was securely locked.
Over there.
Cass pointed to a bush-covered area. Frank backed the van into it. I watched him pull out his phone and start pushing buttons. How can he play games at a time like this? I thought.
Hack into Janetta's room camera.
Cass ordered and gave the laptop to Frank. I kneeled between their chairs and watched him work his magic. He is a genius when it comes to hacking. Frank, was this the type of game you were playing when we were in Chicago? He grinned big. I didn't need an answer. The video feed opened, and I could see my mother. Can you hack the other room? I want to see if my father is in there. He moved the feed so it was just a small box on the side and opened a new video. The man in the other room was not my father. My heart sunk.
That's Bean.
I heard Cass whisper. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and dialed.
We found Bean.
The person on the other side started to sob.
Thank you, my queen.
The voice sounded so humble. The video was back on my mother. Cass didn't say much else to the woman. We sat there in the dark checking video feeds. You know, Frank, if you would have let me watch what was going on, I wouldn't have tried what I did. Now I feel embarrassed about my actions.
You know, seraphim are very tied to their offspring and their husbands. It could make a wonderful difference to their health. Take Lupita, she lost her husband and then went into labor early and lost her baby. It was a great loss because we haven't had a birth in 5 years. Your little sister is helping to keep her alive.
Are you talking about the wet nurse? I was confused because she thought she was a subspecies.
Yes.
She studied my face.
All dragons are important, but we all have our place.
You probably wouldn't think that if you were the subspecies. I thought, is Bean her husband? I asked, wondering why she brought the subject up.
He is.
How do you think he will feel when he finds out?
Devastated.
Frank answered before Cass. He took hold of my aunt's hand. I suppose they lost a child too, but I didn't think it was appropriate to ask. We continued to watch the feeds.
You know, your mother thinks that if we allowed anyone to marry who they wanted, our species would thrive again.
You're talking about the Organsis clan?
Yes.
The video feed flickered. There was a loud bang, and a fireball shot down the hallway. It left a trail of fire wherever the liquid touched or dripped. The nurses ran screaming into a corner without an exit to escape from the Drake coming towards them. But it was a diversion while the Seraphim worked on removing all the wires and needles from my mother's body. She laid there limply, eyes shut, and I began to worry that removing all the medical cords was hurting her. Aunt Cass patted my knee.
Skunk is the best medic we have. She will take good care of her.
But she just looked so sick. I choked on the words and the tears were back. This time I could not hide my emotions.
We are on our way.
I heard Helen say. Frank switched screens. We watched them unhook the 2 wires that were attached to Bean.
This isn't good.
I heard Frank say. Across from us, several black vehicles rolled into the parking lot, surrounding the building.
Calm down, Jack. We know what we are doing.
Cass reassured me.
You're giving off so much nervous energy, it's starting to affect me.
I had no idea I was doing that. My heart was beating fast, I could feel it in my neck. I closed my eyes and concentrated on my breathing and nothing else. Immediately, I felt better, and my mind cleared. When I opened them again, the building was surrounded with people and guns. I held my breath. It was automatic. Again, I focused on my breathing and watching the monitor. It was like war had broken out. Are you sure you know what you're doing? I asked Cass. Balls of fire streamed over the top of the building. One exploded a car. It would be impossible for them to get out alive. Another black van pulled up to the fence without its lights on. I held my breath until Skunk emerged from the back of it. She and another Seraphim pulled a stretcher out from it, holding my mother. Cass was already out of the car. I just sat in my seat, not sure if I should get out or not. With all the noise of gunshots and exploding fireballs, I was afraid that something would happen. They slid my mother into our vehicle. She was so close to me that I could reach out and touch her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Fear had such a grip on me that I was unable to move. I was too afraid that I would wake up and find out that this was all a dream. It was my mother who brought me back. She reached weakly up to brush my bangs out of my face.
I'm so glad to see you, my boy.
She mouthed the words, but I heard them in my head. Tears filled my eyes as we stared at each other. I didn't even notice the Drake until Cass protested them, placing him next to my mother. She tried to grab hold of his stretcher. The motion caught my eye and I lunged for it. My mother smiled softly at me as I pulled it all the way back into the van. My mother must have said something to Cass because she didn't say anything more about it except,
He could have stayed in the SUV.
when Frank was in the vehicle, we pulled out of our hiding spot. The van remained in its place. I saw several Drakes jump the fence and get into it before I lost sight of them. We went over some rough terrain. Bean didn't make a sound, but my mother did. Are you okay? I asked, worried.
I'm in a lot of pain.
She said softly.
Do you know where your father is?
Her face was scrunched up. I wished I could tell her that he was at Aunt Cass's house with my little sister, but I couldn't. No, but he gave me my sister. My mother started to sob. Cass looked back at me and shook her head no. I'm sorry, Mom, was all I could think of to say.
I did this to us. JP Pharmaceutical was so promising. I thought for sure I would find the answers I needed there. But all I succeeded in doing was to make myself a lab rat.
Mom, this can wait until we get home. Try to rest. I heard Frank swear under his breath. The van behind us moved to our side as we sped down the highway. Lights flashed, and sirens blared.
It's okay. We are getting an escort.
Where are we going?
To the airport.
Frank said, no longer checking his rear-view mirror. I pulled my mother into my arms. She was covered with bruises, probably from the IV. For the first time, I could see her scales. They were tiny, overlapping shields covering every inch of her skin, opaque and flexible. I could not believe that my mother was alive. I hoped to find my father so we could all be together.
Fire and brimstone spin around you. Haze of smoke, can't find what's true. Lost my sight in this darkened maze. Who am I in this heavy daze? Shadows dance on your wicked grin. Secrets held in the whispers thin. Ash and ember fall from the sky. Is this the truth or a twisted lie? Caught in flames that never tire. Burning questions fuel the fire. Smoke and mirrors hide your face. Lost in this infernal chase.